Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on this Wednesday, the 9th of October. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, bringing you news from Scotland and around the world. We don't have a guest with us in the studio tonight, but I hope these stories will be interesting enough to provoke discussion wherever you are watching. And do remember also that Broadcasting Scotland maintains a Twitter account and also one on Blue Sky, where you can comment on the news and whatever is close to your heart. We begin the programme, as we always do, with the latest from Ukraine on this day 959 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine needs to secure and deploy advanced missiles and to achieve faster results with them on the battlefield. He said a meeting with top commanders had been devoted to the development of domestic weapon supplies involving drones, electronic warfare, and above all, deploying missiles that would reap rapid benefits in battlefield confrontations with Russian forces. In all of Ukraine's missile achievements, there must be more combat accomplishments, both at the front and on Russian territory, he said. Results are needed faster, and all relevant tasks are now being carried out. Ukrainian forces were maintaining sufficient pressure on Russian troops in Russia's Kursk region, where Kyiv launched a mass incursion in August. Fighting is now going on in Kursk region for a third month, and we're maintaining the necessary pressure on Russia in this sector, President Zelensky has said. President Biden has called off a 4-day trip to Germany this week that had been intended to culminate in a summit to discuss Volodymyr Zelensky's victory plan for Ukraine. The White House said on Tuesday evening that the president would stay at home to, quote, oversee preparations and the response to Hurricane Milton, which is expected to make landfall in Florida today. Russian attacks on Ukraine's second city of Kharkiv on Tuesday killed 2 people and wounded more than 30, regional authorities said. Kharkiv, which lies in northeastern Ukraine near the Russian border, has been hit by relentless attacks for months. The victims were a woman and a man in their 70s. Russia's telecoms watchdog on Tuesday announced that it was banning US social media platform Discord for violating the country's laws, signaling the latest move by authorities to tighten control over the internet. Donald Trump has had as many as 7 private phone calls with Vladimir Putin since leaving office, and also gave Putin COVID testing machines, claimed US journalist Bob Woodward in his new book, War. Trump has denied the reporting in an interview with ABC News' Jonathan Karl. The book also claimed that months into the war, the United States had intelligence pointing to highly sensitive, credible conversations inside the Kremlin that Putin was seriously considering using nuclear weapons to avoid major battlefield losses. US intelligence pointed to a 50% chance that Putin would use tactical nukes if Ukrainian forces surrounded 30,000 troops in the southern city of Kherson, the book says. Turning now to Israel and Gaza, at least 42,010 Palestinian people have been killed and 97,720 injured in Gaza since 7th October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. US President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a 50-minute phone call in which they were joined by US Vice President Kamala Harris. It was anticipated that they would discuss Israeli plans to retaliate against Iran for a wave of missiles fired by Tehran on 1st of October. That attack had been a response, the Iranians said, to the assassination by Israel of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, has published a flash update about the latest situation in Lebanon, which says 1/4 of Lebanese territory is now under Israeli military displacement orders. It said, Lebanon's humanitarian crisis is deteriorating at an alarming rate as Israeli airstrikes increasingly targeted critical civilian infrastructure. It said that 2,083 people killed and 9,869 had been injured in Lebanon. The governor of Akkar in the far north of Lebanon has said there are obstacles to delivering aid to the people who have sought refuge there after being internally displaced by Israeli strikes. Hezbollah has said its fighters have fired rockets and artillery shells as Israeli troops tried to advance in the Meis al-Jabal area from several directions, it said, adding that clashes are ongoing. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has condemned Israel's invasion of Lebanon, saying that the international community should not remain indifferent to it. 2 Israelis were killed in Kiryat Shimona in the northeast of Israel after it was reported to have been hit by a rocket barrage from Hezbollah. Israel's military says it has destroyed the launcher used for the attack. Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that the number of Palestinians killed by Israeli attacks inside the Gaza Strip on Wednesday has risen to 60, including in an incident which it reported 15 civilians were killed today when the Israeli occupation forces bombed the tents of displaced people in Jabalah. It has not been possible for journalists to independently verify the casualty figures being issued during the conflict. The IDF has ordered the closure once again of several hospitals in northern Gaza, including the Kamal Adwan, Indonesia and Al Abda hospitals. The Al Mazan Center for Human Rights described the situation as deja vu on social media, adding, "We all know the horrors that follow such orders." The International Rescue Committee warned that after a year of conflict, as many as 51,000 children in Gaza could be unaccompanied or separated from their parents or caregivers. At least 5 Palestinians have been killed in the Israeli-occupied West Bank city of Nablus. At least 25 Palestinians have been detained by Israeli soldiers in the Israeli-occupied West Bank over the past day. And now for news from Britain and the Tory leadership campaign. Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch are the final 2 candidates to become Conservative leader after James Cleverly was eliminated in the last round of voting among Tory MPs in a stunning turnaround of fortune. Cleverly had topped the 3rd round of voting but came 3rd in the one on Wednesday, losing 2 MPs' votes to reach a total of 37. Badenoch came first, going from 30 votes on Tuesday to 42. Jenrick moved from 31 supporters to 41. The choice will now be made in a ballot of Conservative Party members, with the result announced on 2nd of November. It means the next opposition leader will be firmly on the right of the party, with the main differences between Jenrick and Badenoch ones of emphasis. Jenrick has pushed policies around migration, while Badenoch has focused more on culture war issues and institutional reform. To the government now, and Sir Keir Starmer has refused to rule out raising employers' national insurance contributions amid speculation that the measure is being considered as part of the budget. Speaking at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday, Starmer refused to specify whether his manifesto commitment not to raise national insurance applied to employee and employer payments. Labour's manifesto included a tax lock on working people, a pledge not to raise rates of income tax, national insurance or VAT. Rishi Sunak, the interim leader of the opposition, asked the Prime Minister twice to clarify whether that promise also applied to employers' national insurance contributions. "We made an absolute commitment in relation to not raising tax on working people," Starmer replied. Pressed again, the Prime Minister added, "We set out our promises in the manifesto. We were returned with a huge majority to change the country for the better, and I stick to my promises in the manifesto." Asked whether the government would rule out raising employers' national insurance contributions in general, the Prime Minister's spokesman told reporters, "When it comes to taxes, I have nothing to add beyond what is in the manifesto, which is clear that we will ensure taxes on working people are kept as low as possible, and that we will not increase taxes on working people, which is why we will not increase national insurance, income tax or VAT." Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, will deliver her first budget on the 30th of October. She is considering which revenue-raising measures she can use to offset the threatened cuts to public services that were built into the last Conservative government's spending plans. There's been speculation that changes to employers' national insurance contributions are among the measures being considered by Starmer and Reeves. Analysts have argued that pensions could be a particular target for reform. At the moment, employers' contributions to pensions are not subject to employer or employee national insurance contributions. Speculation that Reeves was considering this move began after Steve Webb, a former Liberal Democrat pensions minister, argued it would be the least politically difficult way to recoup some of the £49 billion tax relief afforded to pensions each year. An IFS report said the existing pension tax system provides overly generous tax breaks to those with the biggest pensions, those with high retirement incomes, and those receiving big employer pension contributions, and there is a strong case for reform. Turning to the other side of finance in the UK, and new research by the Trussell charity has found that as many as 9 million people in the UK experience levels of poverty and hunger so extreme they are vulnerable to reliance on charity food handouts. The report by the Trussell found Labour will fail to deliver its manifesto promise to remove the moral scar of food banks unless it tackled low household income in this group, which amounted to 1 in 7 of the population. There were 1 million more people in what the report defined as hunger and hardship, living on income at least 25% below the relative poverty line than 5 years ago, and nearly 3 million more than there were 2 decades ago, the study found. Trussell said the rapid growth in recent years of households in this kind of deep poverty, meaning they regularly struggle to afford food, heating, clothing, and other everyday basics, had driven food bank use to record levels. Children are at high risk of facing hunger and hardship, with a fifth of all UK youngsters falling into this category. A third of larger families, those with 3 or more children, were also at high risk of dependency on charity food. The Chancellor is expected to continue to try and resist pressure from poverty campaigners and MPs to abolish the 2-child limit. The Treasury believes the £3 billion cost of abolishing the much criticised Tory policy is now unaffordable, given the competing demands for investment across public services. The SNP's Westminster MPs have repeatedly attempted to have the 2-child cap abolished. However, Scottish Labour MPs have voted against all previous motions by the SNP calling on the new Labour government to repeal the measure. Trussell says fixing the UK's outdated and stingy benefit system is vital to cut food banks. He has also called for an uprating of housing benefit rates in line with rents and protection for disability benefits. The study found that most, that is 58% of people facing hunger and hardship, were in a household where at least one person is working. Almost 4 in 10 people in households claiming universal credit were in hunger and hardship. Trussell, formerly known as the Trussell Trust, is the UK's biggest food bank network, with more than 1,400 food bank outlets. Last year, it gave out a record 3.1 million food parcels. It has pledged to end the need for food banks, arguing they have no place in a just and compassionate society. Staying with the UK government now, and the UK government's official climate regulator has appointed the head of the Energy Industries Trade Association to lead its work helping to drive the UK's emission to net zero by 2050. Emma Pinchbeck, the head of Energy UK, will take up the role of Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee from early next month, after 4 years at the helm of the Trade Association. The former Deputy of Renewable UK will replace Chris Stark, who was appointed to lead the government's Mission Control Centre on Clean Energy, a task force aimed at delivering clean and cheaper power by 2030. Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, said Pinchbeck would join the CCC at a pivotal point in the UK's journey to net zero, halfway through a decisive decade to halt climate change. He added that Pinchbeck's extensive experience leading the decarbonisation of the energy industry underscores how the economics of clean energy are now aligned with climate policy, driving both environmental protection and economic growth. News now from Bosnia, and the search for people still missing in the aftermath of the catastrophic floods and landslides continued today in the Butorović Polje region and other areas within the Neretvica river basin. At present, all heavy machinery is being directed towards clearing local roads. Teams on the ground are working to remove debris from the roads, while repairs to the water, electricity and telephone networks are happening in parallel. Efforts to distribute essential supplies such as medicines, food, clothing, hygiene products and other necessities to people in the affected areas are ongoing. Following directives from the federal and regional and municipal government civil protection headquarters, a total of 330 people were evacuated from flood-hit areas in Konjic as fresh rainfall had been forecast overnight. Specialised rescue teams resumed their search for victims in the Jablanica area early this morning as work to clear debris from roads, as well as repairs to water, electricity and telephone lines continue. A fundraising telethon organised by N1, Nova TV and the association Pomozi.ba on Tuesday evening has raised 1,234,393 Bosnian marks in donations. Public figures from Bosnia and Herzegovina took part answering the incoming calls from people from across the country wanting to make a donation to help their fellow citizens whose lives have been devastated by the floods. As well as individual donations, many companies contributed, and by the end of the evening, a total the equivalent of €631,135 had been collected. Excuse me. The Category 5 Hurricane Milton is expected to double its wind field by the time it makes landfall in the US late on Wednesday or early Thursday, with up to 15 feet of storm surge along a low-lying stretch of the Florida coast that includes the cities of Tampa, St. Petersburg and Sarasota. Described as the storm of a century with sustained winds still registering at 160 miles per hour, Milton turned northeast overnight about 300 miles southwest of Tampa, aiming for heavily populated and highly vulnerable communities. It is expected to weaken slightly when it makes landfall to a Category 4 with sustained wind speeds of about 130 miles per hour. Milton has the potential to be one of the most destructive hurricanes on record for West Central Florida, the National Hurricane Center warned. In a morning update, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, said it was not clear exactly where the eye of the storm would come ashore, but the impact would be broader than that. Absolutely every place on the west coast of Florida could get major storm surge. DeSantis later said 8,000 National Guard members would be activated, and he had spoken with Joe Biden about Florida's needs. Everything that we've asked for, the administration has approved, he said. Deanne Criswell, director of FEMA, said at a news conference that she would travel to Florida today and would send more agency personnel to the state. I want the people to hear from me directly. FEMA is ready. Authorities have issued mandatory evacuation orders across 11 Florida counties with a combined population of about 5.9 million people, and said anyone choosing to stay behind must fend for themselves. Under current projections, the surge is expected to hit Fort Myers Beach, an area still recovering from Hurricane Ian 2 years ago that smashed a causeway to outlying islands. The area was also hit by Hurricane Helene 2 weeks ago, raising concerns that discarded furniture, appliances and debris from that storm will become projectiles in this next one. DeSantis said the state deployed more than 300 dump trucks that had removed 1,300 loads of debris. Before Helene hit, residents staying behind were encouraged to write their name and social security numbers on their bodies for easier post-mortem identification. There were reports of bull sharks swimming in the flooded streets after Helene. Wherever Milton comes ashore, the damage is expected to be extensive, with seawater funneling up through coastal channels inland. To Scotland now, and First Minister John Swinney addressed the Scottish Renewables and Renewable UK Floating Offshore Wind Conference in Aberdeen on its opening day today. In his speech, Mr Swinney set out how renewable energy can drive green growth and make Scotland a more progressive and prosperous country. The First Minister said that the Scottish Government will place clean energy at the centre of the vision for Scotland's future as a modern and dynamic nation. Mr Swinney said, "The North East has been at the heart of Scotland's recent industrial story, becoming synonymous with the innovation that has fuelled our economy. Now we need it to be the powerhouse of the renewables revolution, and in doing so, it will transform our economy once again." The Scottish Government is working with developers, industry and academia to make the most of this era-defining opportunity to use green growth to build a robust, well-being economy that benefits everyone. No sector better exemplifies this ambition for purposeful collaboration than floating offshore wind. Along with other sources of clean energy, floating offshore wind is central to my vision for Scotland's future as a modern and dynamic nation. My government is focused on ending child poverty, supporting economic growth, improving public services, and achieving a net zero Scotland, and I am clear that a thriving renewable sector is central to meeting all of these objectives. By working together, I know that is what we can deliver. Staying with the Scottish Government, and victims of crime will receive improved support, advice and information as part of planned reforms to the Victim Notification Scheme, VNS. Under proposed changes to the scheme, which entitles victims or close relatives of victims to certain information about the person responsible for the crime, a new victim contact team will be set up to give personalised support to victims based on their individual needs. Victims will automatically be referred to the team for a trauma-informed discussion about their options for registering for the VNS and for an explanation of their rights. The amount of information available to victims about the offenders, which includes information about their release, will also be expanded. The Scottish Government will introduce the reforms as part of its response to recommendations in the independent review of the Victim Notification Scheme, which heard directly from victims about their experiences of the justice system and the VNS. Recent experiences with how the VNS operated in relation to measures to manage the prison population have also informed the response to the review. The Scottish Government has agreed the majority of the review's recommendations, including the central proposal of creating a victim contact team, with plans developed following discussions with justice and victim support organisations. Legislation to underpin the creation of the contact team will be progressed through the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Scotland Bill, which is continuing its passage through Parliament. Victims Minister Siobhan Brown said, "These reforms will put the needs of victims firmly at the heart of the notification scheme. By increasing the information available to victims, improving communication across justice agencies and making the system more accountable, we can ensure that the scheme continues to be as effective and trusted as possible." We've already begun work to implement the independent review's recommendations, including the creation of a victim contact team to provide personalised support for victims. Each victim has different needs that deserve to be handled sensitively, and victims will automatically be referred to the team who will explain their rights and provide support. I'm grateful to all those who shared their experiences during the independent review, particularly victims and their families. We will continue to listen to their voices as we continue strengthening support for them and progress these latest reforms to the Victim Notification Scheme. Orkney Islands Council has secured £3 million Scottish Government funding for plans to replace its internal ferry fleet. The funding will help the local authority develop a planned pilot for 2 electric ferries and its business case for a replacement internal ferry fleet. The Council plans to introduce 8 new vessels to link communities and boost tourism. This includes 3 large ferries to serve the islands of Westray, Stronsay, Sandy and Ede, with plans being drawn up for all of Orkney's air and ferry-linked island communities. The Orkney funding is on top of an additional £42 million provided in this year's budget to support local authority ferry services across Scotland. Finance Secretary Shona Robeson, who chairs the Orkney Internal Ferry Replacement Task Force, said, "The funding will enable Orkney Islands Council to take forward its business case to replace its internal ferry fleet. It will also help bring forward their pilot of electric ferries, and I am grateful to Orkney Islands Council for its constructive engagement through this process." The Scottish Government is committed to working alongside Scotland's island communities to empower them to thrive. Since 2021 to 22, our Islands programme has distributed more than £12 million to support 61 critical infrastructure projects on 50 islands. We are also collaborating with islanders, local authorities and delivery partners to ensure that the new National Islands Plan, which we expect to publish next year, meets their needs and supports their ambitions. That's the news tonight, but before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We're at crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay our bills and survive. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. And please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you very much for watching tonight's programme, wherever you are. I hope, as I said at the beginning, that it stimulates some discussion. Goodbye and good night for me, and please join us again on Broadcasting Scotland tomorrow. Good night.